Hey everybody, my name is Dieter. I am 26 years old living in Las Vegas, and I'm playing 300 hours of live 1-3 no limit hold'em to find out if I'm actually good enough to move up in stakes. And along the way, I'm sharing my entire thought process for all the key hands, the good, the bad, the ugly, basically what I did and why I decided to do that in the moment, and then why I think what I did was a punt. This is just the second video in this series, and after the first one, definitely have some work to do. I played for about 7 hours and ended up losing almost $800. Also, I just want to say I'm so genuinely grateful and honestly a little embarrassed that 1,700 people watched that video. That's a lot of people. That could fill an entire high school gym, which is just sort of insane to think about. So thank you so much if you watched that one. Anyway, since then, I've played for another 12 and a half hours across 3 sessions. So let's jump right into the most interesting and significant hands. So in the first hand, I pick up pocket fives under the gun, and I decide to raise it up to 15. The hijack, button, and big blind all call, so we go 4 ways to a flop of king 8-3 rainbow. The big blind checks, and then before I can even act, the hijack and button both check out of turn. So with the action back on me and having pocket fives here, I think I want to clean up a lot of equity from all the random 4 overcards these guys could have. And I don't think they ever connect with this board if they were planning on checking back. So I bet really small, just $10, trying to essentially play a heads up pot against the big blind's wide range, and that's actually how it plays out. The hijack and button quickly fold, and then the big blind makes the call. So the turn comes the jack of spades, and the big blind checks it over again. And at this point, I tried to build a rough image of his range, and I decided there's some hands that I do want to bluff, like 6s, 7s, any suited or offsuit 8x, and then maybe a hand like pocket 9s. But on the turn, I don't really want to be putting money in against his stronger hands like king x or better. He could still have some slow played 2-pair, maybe just hit a random 2-pair with a hand like jack 3 suited. And I don't think the hands that I do want to bluff necessarily will take 2 streets. So I decided to check this one back and see what he does on the river, figuring that his stronger hands will just come out and bet for the most part, and his weaker hands will go ahead and check, giving me the green light to bluff. Now the river comes the ace of clubs, and the big blind actually leads pretty quickly for a really small size, just $15 into the 80. And just for some context, the big blind had just sat down at the table. This was actually his very first hand he was dealt, and typically with a new player in a situation like this, they typically play pretty straightforward without knowing how the hands have played out previously in this game. I got a couple comments on my last video where a player bet really small on the river just like this, and some people were saying this could be a bet small to induce a bluff type situation, but I just don't see that happening at 1-3 ever. And if you are aware enough and good enough to sit down and try to bet small to induce me on this exact river, then, you know, I guess good for you. But 99% of the time, I just don't think this is a strong hand, like 2-pair or better. This just smells like an ace high type of hand that floated my small flop bet and then ran into a weak top pair, or maybe even a king x that's block betting now with the ace river for a cheap showdown. So honestly, just can't help myself against a capped range, so I decided to raise it up to $80 as a bluff. The big blind thinks for a little bit and then ends up flashing me an ace and makes the fold. So I get to steal this one with the pocket fives. In hindsight, I like the way I played this hand, but I really hate my sizing on the river. In the moment, just looking over at the big blind, I didn't get the feeling he was ready to fight for this pot, but in general, raising to like 105 instead of 80 probably goes a long way in killing off any curious thoughts the big blind might have with a smaller raise size. Now this next hand is one of those that I kind of wish I had back. A bunch of players limp in for $3, and obviously I check my option in the big blind with the 8 for offsuit. The flop comes ace 7-4 with 2 spades, and it checks around. Now the turn is another 4, and it might be best to just lead out here with trips, but I decide to check with the intention of check raising. The under the gun player to my left does take a stab for $5. One player calls in position, and I decide to raise it up to 20, and only under the gun makes the call. The river comes the 9 of diamonds, and I bet again for 35. Honestly, wasn't doing too much thinking in this hand about what I'm trying to get value from under the gun's range or anything like that. I was just acting on autopilot, but then I get raised to 135, and right away I kind of hate where I'm at. With this particular opponent, I don't think this is ever a bluff in a million years, but you know, the rationalizing demons in my brain start whispering, and in the moment I end up convincing myself that he could be value raising worse hands, like a 3-4 suited, 4-5, 6-4, all of which could limp pre-flop. So I end up calling, knowing in my soul that I was probably beat, and I was beat. Under the gun shows the ace-4 of diamonds for a full house, which actually makes a lot of sense. And yeah, just a personal note for this hand, I think this idea that the under the gun could be value raising a worse 4 is pretty off from reality, because this player definitely knows if he raises for value, he needs to be called by a worse hand. And if that's the case, then I think my call is probably just lighting $100 on fire for no reason, but just gotta move on. And a few orbits later, for the first time in this 1-3 challenge, I actually looked down at pocket aces in the hijack, and there's some action. Under the gun limps in for 3, +2 also limps, and then the low jack raises to 12 with only about 140 behind. So action's on me, and I think specifically with aces here, a super small 3-bet size makes a lot of sense. The low jack hadn't raised a single hand pre-flop for hours, and my read was he's probably just going with his hand no matter what I do, so I don't want to shut out one of the limpers from potentially flatting with a weaker range and a deeper stack. So for that reason, I click it to $30. Unfortunately, the 2 limpers fold, and the low jack immediately moves all in. Obviously, I snap call. I let him know right away that I have aces, and surprisingly, I hold on a board with a king, queen, and a jack. So there you go. I actually win a simple hand for once. And the very next deal, I have ace queen offsuit in the low jack. Under the gun limps, I raise it up to 15, and the button, small blind, and under the gun limper make the call. So 4 ways to a board of queen 8 deuce with the queen and 8 of diamonds. Small blind and under the gun check it over, and almost always I'm gonna bet top pair, top kicker on this flop multi-way, but I catch something out of the corner of my eye that made me very, very confident that the button was going to take a stab here. So I very quickly call an audible and check it over, and the button does oblige with a small $10 bet. Small blind calls, under the gun calls, and now it's back on me. And I think given the button's very small size and the other players just calling the 10, it looks like a pretty great spot to check raise. So I make it 55, and this is just another situation where I think my decision to raise was good, but my sizing is just really bad and lazy. In game, I remember being really focused on not giving a hand like queen jack or queen 10 a reason to fold. But looking back in Vegas 1-3 games at least, unless one of these guys literally swam to the casino, which did not seem like the case, this plan of check raising flop and barreling with a chunky value bet on the turn just doesn't get a whole lot of action from worse queens. I think it makes a lot more sense to go for maximum value against all the inelastic flush draws like ace x of diamonds, king x of diamonds, and obviously the jack 10 and 9-10 straight flush draws. If I had to play this flop again, I'd probably go at least 95 here because I don't think any of those hands are ever folding. But as played, only the small blind makes the call for 55, and the turn is another offsuit deuce. The small blind checks, and again, not thrilled with my sizing here, but I make it 110, and the small blind quickly calls again. The river bricks out, and when the small blind checks for a 3rd time, at this point, I kind of felt really weird about betting again for value. I think I recognized that when the small blind puts in this much money on this board, 95% of the time, he just has a strong missed draw that's not going to call anything anyway. So this could be a big mistake, but I decided to check it back to kind of see his hand and see if I was right. And ace queen is in fact good. The small blind had the king jack of diamonds, so I definitely missed out on a lot of value with my small raise on the flop. If I did make it 95 on the flop, pot would be 270 on the turn versus just 190, and then the dollar value of my turn bet just gets to be so much bigger as well. So that goes to show how being lazy with how much you bet really holds back your win rate. I think I could have easily squeaked out another $100 or so with this exact hand. So that was it for the first session. I played for about 3 hours and made $315. A couple days later, I'm back at the Wynn, and this first hand isn't a big pot, but I thought it was a cool one to show how much you can really exploit somebody with just one key assumption. I have queen 10 off on the button. Under the gun +2 opens up the action to 15. I make the call, and everyone else folds. So we go heads up to a flop of 9-5-4 with 2 spades. +2 bets again for 15, and I decide to call. I do have some backdoor straight draws and a backdoor 10 high flush draw, but honestly, in this exact situation, I don't really care about all that. I think I'm probably calling with any 2 random cards, and here's why. After getting called on this board, there are some players that are just never in a million years double barreling the turn without a made hand, and from what I've seen so far from +2, this is probably one of those players. So my plan is essentially to let him show me what he has on the turn with his action. If he bets again for a reasonable size, obviously just folding my queen high. But if he does check or bet super small, I think I just get to win this pot 99.9% of the time. So when the turn comes in offsuit 10 and +2 kind of auto bets $15 again, part of me is actually disappointed in a way that I made top pair and don't get to bluff as I planned. I think it's pretty obvious I have the best hand here given the action, and given +2 has some gut shots like king queen and all the strong ace high hands that might call a really small raise one time, I decided to raise it up to 45 for value. And after performing a nice little hand, funeral service, +2 ends up folding, and based on what he said after the hand, I think my read was pretty spot on here.
Set?
No.
9-10?
Yeah.
Good. 10, bro.
Now, this next hand is definitely the weirdest one of this video. We're six-handed, and under the gun opens up the action to $13. I have ace-jack offsuit in the hijack, and without thinking too much, I decide to just flat call, which, looking back, is just not a great idea. Under the gun is a recreational player, and with ace-jack off, there's just so much incentive to 3-bet small to shut out the other players behind and play a heads-up pot with her. But as played, I flat, which opens up a waterfall of calls from the cutoff small blind and the big blind. So 5 ways to a flop of 9-3-3 rainbow. The small blind and big blind check, and now the under the gun raiser checks as well. So it's on me, and this is decision point number 2 that I'm not quite sure how I feel about looking back, but I decided to do something that I rarely do and start bluffing here multi-way. This under the gun player was not the type to check a strong hand 5 ways on a board like this, except maybe sometimes with pocket aces, so not too worried about her. And with the 9-3-3 flop, really the only player who should have a lot of 3x hands is the big blind. So my thought process was that I can probably get smaller pocket pairs and 9x hands to call, and on the vast majority of runouts, if I don't get raised at any point, I can just keep applying pressure and get those hands to fold on the river. So I start with a $20 bet, and everyone folds except for the big blind, who quickly calls. The turn is the queen of diamonds, which brings in backdoor straight draw and flush draw. The big blind checks, and continuing on with my plan, no matter how flawed it may be, I tried to think of a size that a 9 or a non-believing pocket pair would call one more time here on the turn, basically trying to squeak out some value with my bluff before bombing most rivers. So I land on 65. And the big blind's call is already in the middle as soon as I look up from betting. So a couple things here. Overall in game, I'm feeling pretty good about this spot. I know some people are super hesitant to put in any weight into live reads like timing tells or bet pacing or someone's demeanor at the table. But when the big blind snap calls the flop and snap calls the turn, not even considering a raise for literally 1 second, I think it's pretty unlikely that I'm up against trips here, especially since just looking at him intuitively, it felt like he was playing his hand cautiously as a bluff catcher instead of trapping. So at this point, I'm ready to go for it on the river and make him fold all of his bluff catchers. But when another queen comes out, now the big blind leads for 80. And in general, he was playing pretty quickly, but he does hesitate for about 3 seconds before making this bet. And I am very, very confused. I wasn't expecting him to lead here almost ever, and more specifically, not for this size. Since I already discounted most of his 3x hands from my previous read, when his range is overwhelmingly 9x or pocket pairs that are bluff catchers, are those hands really coming out and betting 1/3 pot on this river? I guess maybe some players would do that, but in this case, I don't really know what the purpose of that bet would be, and it didn't seem like that was what the big blind was doing. So sitting at the table with just ace high, trying to work through what the hell is going on here, I decided to try my best to pick up on some kind of live tell. And one thing I realized is that while his sizing wasn't exactly polarizing, the way that he was acting was. I ended up tanking for about a minute and a half. So I got the idea to change my own demeanor a bit and make it seem like I was leaning more towards a call instead of a fold, you know, counting out all the calling chips, the whole 9. And I think I picked up on a really subtle shift in his eyes. It was the tiniest thing, but it was almost like they were saying, this isn't gonna work. And after whatever I saw there, I decided to go with my intuition and immediately put in the call. And the big blind turns over pocket deuces for a counterfeit 2 pair, and I win this very healthy and welcome pot with ace high. Next, I had 5-6 of spades in the cutoff. I tried to isolate one limper to 15, but I got a couple calls and end up going 4 ways to a flop of 8-7-3 with the 8 and 7 of spades. So I have a straight flush draw, pretty pumped, and I end up getting it all in on the flop versus the big blind, who only had about 140 in her stack. And of course, I completely brick everything and lose a pretty big pot to the ace-8 offsuit. And then for the rest of the session, we were actually short-handed for a pretty long time, so we were playing a lot of small pots, and I didn't want to get too distracted by taking notes and missing hands. After an hour or so of that, I decided to rack up. So for session number 2, I played for about 4 hours and walked away with a $92 profit. Now for the third and final session, my friends were going to the Westgate, play 1-2, and I decided to tag along without recording it. And even though there weren't really any interesting hands, I played for about 5.5 hours and left with a $162 profit. Now technically at the Westgate it is a 1-2 game, but it's got a $400 max buy-in and the straddle was on for a bunch of hands, so yeah, I'm including it. With all that said, almost 20 hours played so far, and after a pretty rough start, things are starting to look a lot better. I'm only down $202 or roughly $10 per hour, but overall feeling really good about the way I've been playing. Whether my decisions are wrong or right, I feel like I'm at least thinking about them, even in all the smaller pots that you guys don't get to see. So if you made it here to the end of the video, thanks for watching. Seriously, it means a lot. Any and all constructive feedback is more than welcome in the comments, so please don't feel like you need to hold back, and hopefully the next time you see me I will officially be in profit. See you guys next time.